8,000 meter climbing is such an interesting puzzle when you do it in a speed ascent way, where, you have to have the skills, you have to have the mental side dialed, you have to have the nutrition, you have to have some logistics, you have to have a little bit of luck, you have to have a lot of fitness, you have to have all these different things. And I think my kind of engineer brain is very intrigued by puzzles like that. So I think I'll definitely be in the 8,000ers for sure this year, and hopefully for a while to come.
Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
All right, welcome back to episode 23 of the Duffel Shuffle Podcast. We've got an awesome guest, Tyler Andrews, coming at you today. But first, Adrian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I have a little tear in my eye. I'm in my last few days here in Switzerland. It's been just a epic last week with a fantastic storm cycle and good stability, kind of like what dreams are made of. So I'm feeling content, but also sad that it's time to wrap it up. How about you?
Are you more sad about the skiing or the food or just the culture, the politics?
Just all of it. all of it. You want to dive right into politics? Let's hold that for a few more minutes. I mean, it is. I mean, the funny thing, I've probably talked about this on the podcast. The thing about skiing in Europe for me is it's all of those things, right? Like, it isn't the best snow in the world. It isn't necessarily always the best terrain in the world. It isn't the best food in the world. But when you put it all together, like for me, it's the best damn place to spend a few weeks skiing every winter with people I really enjoy. It challenges me. It pushes me. It makes me laugh. I get skunked all the time and reminded how hard this sport can be and getting good conditions can be. And yeah, it's all just so fun. And then the people and the town and the transport and the politics, like it is just simpler here. The only time we use our car is pretty much to like go to a climbing gym. Everything else, from phenomenal skiing to bank to, supermarket to great restaurants to, train stations, like it's just all walking. And I just cherish that so much.
I agree. I mean, I find that about just ski travel in general. It might not be the best of any one thing, but when you're traveling skiing, it's all pretty fun and new and changing and interesting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And with that said, though, like me and Em had that whole conversation today with like, should we move to Switzerland for a year or two with the kid? It would be great for the kid to get a different country, a different vibe. Like I really believe in that if it's possible. If we're fortunate enough to be able to do something like that, I can take my work anywhere would we want to do it. And I think we might well. But one thing we both absolutely said is like, but we want to live in the United States long term. We want to raise our kid in the United States long term. And that's an interesting kind of position to be in right now with politics, and kind of the last 5 weeks have been pretty darn unique in the United States, I'd say. And certainly our friends here from Sweden and Switzerland and all around the world are kind of like, what? Are you sure you want to go back? And we won't get into it in our news segment, but like American exceptionalism, I'm still a real believer in, despite all of our problems, which are so starkly on view right now. So I'm really excited to get home next week as well.
Yeah, it's pretty good being home. That's for sure.
Nice. So you are home. You had a great trip.
Yep. Japan was amazing. I don't even remember if we spoke since I got home from Japan, but great trip. Japan is also a wonderful country to visit for ski travel. I think everyone should visit Japan, whether they're a skier or not, because it's just such a fascinating culture. But the, ski travel, visiting Japan via a ski trip was quite an awesome experience. Had some great skiing, great food, great people, and also happy to be home.
And didn't you roll right into a storm cycle at home?
pretty much right into a storm cycle, although it wasn't like a crazy Tahoe storm cycle. We had a little bit of rain at low elevations and then turned to snow, pretty heavy snow, but it wasn't like feet of snow at lake level. So it was manageable from a home defense standpoint.
And were you getting big snowstorms in Japan, or was it more like a little bit each night kind of thing?
Actually, constant? I think the Japan trip that I had was unique in that we arrived right at the tail end of a pretty strong period of snow. And I had my first day skiing in Japan was like what dreams are made of. You're so deep in the snow that you can't breathe and like your goggles are getting covered so you can't see. Like truly the most intense over the head face shots I've ever had. And then it went dry for 12 days. And so we had this interesting period. I mean, people were like, I've never seen it go dry this long. We were in Niseko at the time and the streets of Niseko were all asphalt. And people were like, what is this asphalt in the winter? Like normally
you're not meant to see the
asphalt at all. But it provided the opportunity to get up into some bigger terrain. And I think for me, I actually think that section of my trip was the most memorable because we got to ski a lot and it just allowed us to move around in a way that you can't when there's no viz and deep snow. So we got to ski Yote and ski into the crater and do a bunch of skiing on Yote, just like ski touring. And we saw the ocean from multiple vantage points. Amazing. It was cool. And we got to ski some steeper lines and kind of explore a bit more. And then it turned back on again and we had pretty consistent snow. We had a couple days of like feet of snow in Otaru and then just the trickle. It seemed like every day you're getting, a few inches and with the wind, it all resets pretty frequently.
So awesome. And, this was primarily a guiding trip for you. You were working for Alpenglow Expeditions, new country for us, which is pretty fun. Thanks for launching a new program. I feel like that's a goal every year to launch 1 to 2 new countries through the guide company. And this certainly seems like a winner. Tell the audience, like, how is the difference between guiding and a personal trip? Are you jonesing for a personal trip or were you getting everything out of this you want out of it? Like, where's that balance?
That's an interesting question. I think, I went into it very much with the mindset of like, this is a guiding trip. And, we had 2 private groups and we also had some prep days on the front end of our trip and some days in between the groups. So my co-guide Isaac and I were able to get out and ski personally without guiding. And we still had the mindset of like, we're prepping for these trips in the back of our head. So we had some, fun ski days. We got to ski some stuff that maybe we wouldn't be guiding with a group we don't know super well. But, I went into it with the mindset of like, this is a work trip. And I feel like I got that out and more. I got some great skiing and I got some cultural experiences. So I think Japan is just such an incredible country to visit. And I think that the skiing there is awesome. And if you're intrigued at all, I think whether you're an advanced backcountry skier or, a newer backcountry skier or just a resort skier, there's just so much to do in Japan from, big resorts like Niseko United, down to little resorts like Tomamu and Sapporo Tien with just a handful of chairlifts and tons of tree skiing to be had.
In terms of shameless plug, if someone's a skier thinking of going, like, why should they go with a guide company? Why would you go with Alpenglow? Why would someone go with a guide instead of just figuring it out on their own?
I mean, I think it's an interesting place because culturally it's very stimulating. Obviously there's the language barrier. If you don't speak Japanese, it's intimidating. And then on top of it, there's just so many things that are different. Like when you're in a sushi restaurant and a robot is bringing you the food, it's just like, how do I interact with this, little moving cart? So culturally, there's a lot of stimulation there. Yet at the same time, it's a first world country. It feels very thought out and manicured and forgiving. And so in some respects, I felt like I almost got more culture out of my Japan trip than like if I went to South America. Yet in a different lens, I feel like, South America is a little bit more culturally just a contrast from the US. But I think back to your question of why go with a guide service is you get to, explore restaurants that have been vetted and people have eaten at before. And we know, we can get a big table here, or, this is the place where we split into 2 groups because all the seating is small, and knowing like where the good skiing is. I think Japan was fascinating in that the ski touring complexity was not that significant. It's fairly easy, with good ski touring base to figure out the ski touring and the avalanche hazard. The complexity is the steep drainages and the vegetation. Mm-hmm. And so, in our exploration days, in our prep days, we were going out and finding terrain that we could bring the group to, not because we didn't feel like we couldn't on-site guide it from a hazard standpoint, but like you don't want to bring a group into this like super thick vegged zone that they can't make any turns in.
Right.
And so kind of different challenges than we're used to in the US or in Canada or even in Europe. And I think bringing a guide or hiring a guide is a way to guarantee that when you fly across the world, you're going to find good skiing. Yep. Certainly the conditions we can't control, and they are what they are for everyone. There's no like secret zone in Japan. And from what I saw, even though that's what, people think is like, there's still secrets out there. Well,
that's what the brochure says.
But just guaranteeing that like, you're going to ski in the best terrain on any given day with the conditions that you're dealt.
Yeah.
Is why you hire a guide.
I mean, hands down. I asked kind of specifically about Japan and you gave a great answer, but you and I have talked about this. Like, as long as I have sponsored dollars or Emily has sponsored dollars, when we come to a new place, the first thing we do is hire a certified mountain guide for a couple of days at least. We did it in Japan when we went there for a month. We spent the first week with a guide. We do it here in Europe regularly. And that's usually my trips are longer. When I think about someone only having a week for a ski trip or 10 days, it's not that everyone's smart enough to use the apps and figure things out and follow maps and all the rest, but to maximize those days, whether it's great food or great powder or linking the right slopes and not getting stuck in bushwhacky exits. Yeah. Like, that's something that is so financially, I think, worth it if possible.
I think I look at it as like an insurance policy, and if my trip is long and I have room to spare some days going a little bit sideways, maybe my insurance policy is smaller and I hire a guide for fewer days. And if my trip is short, then I want to hire a guide for most of the days or the whole trip to guarantee that short trip is going to be maximized.
Heck yeah. Plus, you're supporting mountain guides, and mountain guides we want them around. Or I want them around. All right. What do we got? We just wanted to banter today. We haven't caught up in too long, Sam.
Yeah, exactly. We just wanted a soapbox about why you should hire us to travel the world and go skiing. I mean, I think there's some significant news out there, and I do want to start off by talking about some recent avalanche fatalities in the Western US and just some challenging conditions. Here locally, tragically, there was an avalanche fatality 2 days ago in the South Lake area of Lake Tahoe. Our hearts go out to that individual's family and friends. And there was another couple that passed away in an avalanche in Oregon yesterday, I believe. There's a accident in Mammoth Mountain, just kind of abnormal avalanche conditions for us here in the West. And it got a few people, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important news and, really just an important reminder mid-season of course, the seriousness of what we do. And as you kind of pointed out, the current challenges with the snowpack. And I would say potentially, especially in the far west, I think the continental states, I didn't look up the data before we got on the call, but of course, Utah has already had fatalities this year. I assume Colorado has. I haven't looked in a few weeks. And that's not to diminish that at all, but I think that mindset is more common, that when you ski in those places, avalanche fatalities are going to be a part of every winter. In the far west, of course, we still have avalanche incidents and fatalities, but in our maritime snowpack, they tend to be fewer. And so this sudden cycle that happened, and probably for a lot of us, it was, certainly in Tahoe, it was weeks without snow, and then a great system. There were obviously issues in the snowpack instability, and there was also a massive amount of stoke. Now, I have no idea individual incidents, how those things combined or any specifics, but it's certainly a setup. As I was watching from Europe, I remember calling Logan, our chief guide at home, knowing that we were going to be really busy in the Tahoe area and being like, are we good? Are we our correct kind of mountain guide hats on? And of course they were. The team's amazing, but just knowing from afar, seeing that kind of potential setup, I think it's challenging right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know the specifics of each incident yet. And so I don't want to play armchair quarterback, but at the same time, it's important to remember that every single avalanche accident with skiers involved has one thing in common, and that's a decision that was made by a human being. And the decision is to be in that terrain or to be there on that given day. And the human factors of that are that we haven't had a fantastic season with endless pow skiing. And the conditions were a little bit abnormal for us, like you mentioned here in the Maritime Snowpack. And so people made decisions to go to certain terrain, to go out on high hazard days. And it sounds like those decisions were a little bit aggressive in some instances, and probably many, many more instances than the news can capture. And, people get lucky, and we're happy for those people. But it's also important to recognize, take a step back and be like, should I have been in that terrain today? Did I get lucky, or was I right to ski that slope?
Absolutely. And then to the incident in Mammoth, that was obviously professional ski patrollers. You probably have more details. Were they doing avalanche routes at the time?
I believe they were doing avalanche control work. I'm not sure. I don't have many details. And I think, unfortunately, that individual is in critical condition. There were 2 individuals caught in an avalanche. One's in critical condition. And it does sound like they were on the clock working. And, ski patrollers put themselves in risky situations to protect the safety. So I think it's a good reminder to appreciate the work that ski patrollers do. And when they're telling you to slow down on the mountain run, or telling you not to duck ropes and ski in the boundary, oftentimes they come off like they're doing a bad thing for your day. And I think it's important to recognize all the hazards that they've exposed themselves to ensure that your day is a good day. Yeah. A tough but good reminder.
That's exactly where my mind was going. Like that. It's a reminder that this work is dangerous, and they were out there, I assume, doing a job to get terrain open for our fun. And I don't think that's wrong. There are lots of dangerous jobs in our country and in the world that are crucial to other people's lives and experiences. And I believe skiing steep terrain with fresh snow is a really powerful experience. It has a lot of benefits. And so getting that terrain open, I do believe, is worth some level of risk. But it's brutal that it happened, and the loss, I'm sure, for that community and the families is huge. And I hope there's inbounds accidents do continue to happen. I'm sure they will continue to happen. Avalanche incidents, everyone needs to be deeply, deeply studied and understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that was patrol doing their work. I know there were some near misses in the mountains around Tahoe, at the ski areas around Tahoe over this past cycle. And it's just a reminder to always keep your head up as well and ski with a partner and be safe out there, regardless of if you're in the backcountry or skiing in a ski area.
Absolutely.
Well, we can't finish without talking a little bit of politics, because I started it off. We don't want to dive into politics, but the federal impacts that politics have, or the impacts on the federal workforce that politics are having currently, is impacting us as backcountry recreators, whether it's skiing, hiking, climbing. There have been significant cuts to staff throughout the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. And it's been a little bit tough to see. And certainly there's a big picture impact, and then there's the kind of micro impact to our little world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously important news and interesting. I think it's easy to get in a rabbit hole of how much news there is right now. And, some people in America, I'm sure, are quite happy with a lot of the news coming through. A lot of people are not happy at all with the news that's coming through. But when something actually, I think the important thing for this story in our community is it's not just something that we don't really maybe understand, but we think is important and bad or good. This is something that's directly happening that we can understand the ramifications of. Fewer avalanche forecasts per week is something we can understand. A lack of search and rescue abilities in our community is something we can understand. And so this is an issue that I think these are important ones where it's like, well, this is something I understand, I see and feel, and I need to speak to. And so, I think we all had to anticipate this, that the government that was just elected and brought in made part of their platform that they were going to significantly reduce the federal workforce. If they were going to cut from other organizations, why wouldn't they be cutting from the outdoor industry organizations? And so we had to expect it. Now it's real. I think what we can do from this is, one, if we don't like it, talk to our representatives, senators, House of Rep. There are loads of tools out there right now from Protect Our Winters and other places to make it a 30-second call or text or email to your representative. So make your voice heard. And then obviously consider these things in the next election as they come. And there are individuals being hurt by this. I think those stories are important to understand it. And there's the bigger picture, like this is, for us, certainly, like I understand this is our playground and it is being negatively impacted through these decisions. So that's, yeah, it's a bummer. I think it hurts, but I think it's like direct action is possible. And I'll say one more thing about those calls and emails to the state representatives and, congressmen and women, like they work, because this whole thing, like, the reason it's hard to cut federal budgets, as I understand it, is because it's important. Every single piece of every single federal budget line item is important to someone. And if the constituency it's important to speaks up loudly enough, that part might get changed, even though the overall big picture is still heading in a very clear direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw something I think Nick Russell posted yesterday. He called his representative and the voicemail box was full. And that's awesome to hear, because that means that people are calling. And I think, whether you're for it or against it, if you have an issue and you want to complain, make sure you're also backing it up with some action. I think the only thing that bothers me is not when someone's for it or against it, but it's when they complain and they don't do anything about it. Because we all do have some voice and we can share that voice with a representative. So I like that message. And I think, too, it will be interesting to see the direct impacts to us. As of right now, the only impact is people have lost their jobs, which is significant. Don't get me wrong. But I want to see if, when we go to national parks and U.S. Forest Service trailheads, is there trash that hasn't been removed? Are there toilets that are overflowing? Is there actually a direct impact to the environment? Or, I think I'm trying to keep an open mind about these cuts and hope that there's another solution to that workforce a little bit.
Yep. I absolutely agree.
So
more to come.
More to come. Absolutely. We've taken plenty of time, but I do want to briefly just talk about our upcoming guest interview with Tyler Andrews. Tyler's an ultra runner, a mountain climber, a mountain athlete. He came from a running background and he's moving his skill set into the bigger mountains around the world. He's got FKTs on some of the, tallest and most prominent peaks. And he's also got fastest known times on smaller trails and personal objectives that matter to him. He's a fascinating individual in that he is both young and coming into this sport rather recently. And so he's got this kind of unique, different perspective than some of the, other people that have been around for a little bit longer. And it was great chatting with him.
Yeah, I was so excited to have Tyler on the pod and kind of hear his story. He kind of blasted onto the scene through, like you said, FKT's fastest known times, this kind of like niche little world in climbing that's just starting to get, people have been doing speed climbs on big peaks, like 8,000 meter peaks forever, but now it's actually getting like notice and records are being kept. And he came from a really different background than a lot of big mountain climbers out there, certainly the whole generation I grew up with. And so as I started hearing his name, I wanted to hear his perspective. And I think the conversation was a really fun one. And we all have a lot to, learn, or at least kind of like think about in our perspectives and how we're approaching mountains and things like that. So enjoy.
Here we are with our conversation with Tyler Andrews. All right, welcome back to episode 23 of the Duffel Shuffle Podcast. Today we have Tyler Andrews. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So Tyler, you are a mountain athlete. You have a running background, and I know you were a kind of a track and field, long distance track and field athlete in high school and into your 20s, and that has kind of pivoted and your focus has become FKTs. And I know you still do a lot of races and, marathon and longer races, but FKTs seem to kind of be your bread and butter. And the FKT world is such a fascinating world. It was, always a thing, but really with COVID, with a pause in racing for top end running athletes for so long, FKTs became the goal. And so your timing into the world of FKTs, I think, is really fascinating and unique. And you've taken your FKTs to the highest mountains of the world, up into 8,000 meter peaks. So we're really excited to talk to you about FKTs and running and your style and all of that. And yeah, but we do want to start with just like, what's your background? Where did you come from? When did you become a runner? And how did that start happen?
And before you answer that, I'm
Yeah.
going to call out Sam. He said FKT 17 times without defining what it is.
Without defining it, I was wondering that too.
And we're going to get way more into it. But just to begin the conversation, FKT, fastest known time, essentially exactly what it sounds, the fastest known time on a route or a trail or a mountain. Is that a good place to start, Tyler, with the definition?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I use the terms fastest known time and speed record indistinguishably. FKT, I think, has become a more popular acronym, but it's a speed record. It's the fastest time to do a thing, whether it's a trail, a mountain, loop around your driveway, like whatever. You can kind of decide. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
I may have my driveway FKT. That's
nice.
About it.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks for that. Well, we'll let you dive in now. Tyler, tell us from the beginning.
Yeah. Gosh, where to start? So I was not an athletic kid at all. I was like a nerdy musician, like hippie kind of writer, science, just like, I would say like hippie intellectual and up to like adolescence. I was not athletic. My brother was definitely the more athletic one in our family. He was older and bigger and stronger and just always more of the athlete. And I just, like a lot of kids in America, I did sports because I had to at school. And so I did cross country out of basically desperation because I needed an athletic credit more than anything else. And I did not have the kind of immediate success that so many pro runners have, this archetypal story of, I ran the gym class mile and I beat everybody by a minute, or, I signed up for cross country and I'd never run before and I won the state title. Like, it was not like that for me at all. I did it for a couple of years and I was not good at all. And then finally my senior year, we got a new coach at my high school. This guy, John Waldron, who still coaches me today. And he really just kind of instilled in me this idea that running and endurance was something that you could actually get better at. And that was a novel concept to me as like a 17-year-old. I just thought that you were like a jock, like you were an athletic kid or you were not. And I was not. And so I was never going to be good at sports. But he was so patient and cared so much about every kid on the team, whether you were the fastest kid or the slowest kid. And he was like, you know what, if you just train, you're going to get faster. And I was like, yeah, right. No way. and I was like, okay, whatever. And then I did, and I trained and I just did the training that he prescribed and I got faster. And that really started to scratch this itch in my brain of being a very type A, process-oriented, goal-oriented person and seeing, hey, I can work harder. And then I get this incredibly objective, quantifiable result that is, the numbers on the stopwatch, right? And so for me, I fell in love with running very much because of that process of self-improvement, that it was the same passion that I'd had for music, but it was much more quantifiable. So it was, instead of, okay, can I play this scale a certain way? It was, okay, my 5K time, I can see it going down week after week after week. And that was totally addicting to me. So I really fell in love with that process of just figuring out, how can I get a little bit better? How can I, every week, every month, every season, every year, what can I do differently? And so that brought me from, a very mediocre high school runner to a mediocre college runner to, somehow getting out of college. And I found as I moved up in distance, I kept getting better. So then I moved very quickly to the marathon after college and, became kind of like a mediocre, but like suddenly, mediocre professional. I ran in a couple of Olympic trials in the marathon, and I really thought that was where I was going to stay, was in the marathon distance. But I found pretty quickly that, okay, I'm pretty sure I've kind of reached my ceiling here. And I still found, okay, as I go longer beyond the marathon into ultramarathon, that I kept getting better. So it was just this process of experimentation and kind of figuring out, where can I keep finding room for improvement? Where can I be the most competitive? And as I got older and I kept doing longer stuff, I just kept getting better, unfortunately, as stuff got longer, because that meant I had to keep doing longer and longer races, which are really hard. And so yeah, I made a couple of US World Championship teams for 50K. And then I won the US national title for 50 miles, which is longer than 50K. And then I did 100K, that one really well. So it was just again, this process of just keep trying longer stuff and harder trails and longer races and all this stuff. And I think you said in the intro, I really fell into the FKT and mountain world completely by accident. It was because of COVID that the way that most pro running contracts are set up is that you earn almost all of your income through race performances. So when 2020 comes and all of a sudden we have like an entire calendar year where there's no races, we had to kind of get creative. And luckily my sponsor at the time was somewhat generous in terms of, we'll bonus, some of these FKTs, these records. And so that was really it. I'd never thought of myself as a trail runner. I still thought of myself as a road runner at that point, even as an ultra runner. But yeah, it was in 2020 and 2021 where I just kind of started to dabble into this stuff. Like I'd always loved being in the mountains and hiking and stuff like that, but I was not a climber. I was not a mountaineer. I'd never done any of this stuff competitively. At that point, it was like, that was something that I did in my off season, like on vacation, that was just for fun. And I knew like, okay, I know I'm fit and I can maybe move a little bit quicker than your average Joe in the mountains, but I never thought, I'm going to be, a world-class mountain athlete or anything. It was just, this is something I like to do and I do for fun. And I think the kind of turning point moment was here in Ecuador. We have a mountain called Cotopaxi. I'm sure you guys know, big, beautiful, perfect triangle volcano. And Carl Egloff, who is, kind of one of the groundbreaking guys, had the record on that mountain. And I think it was late 2020 or early 2021. And I was like, I'll just go to Cotopaxi and like try and see how quickly I can go up. And I tied his time to the minute. It was like an hour 37. I did an hour 37 or something.
Awesome.
I was like, whoa, with like and I'd like never done anything like that. I had no business doing that. And that was really the turning point of, okay, maybe I should take this more seriously and like actually try and put some training into this, figure out how to train for this stuff, gain some skills in the mountains, do more vert, do, whatever it is. And so then that led me to Ojos in Chile. That went really well. That led me to Aconcagua. That went well. So it was just this kind of like, I felt like fate had kind of pushed my hand a little bit. And all of a sudden it went from literally probably in a year or two from thinking of myself as really a full-time ultra runner to, okay, I feel like I'm really more of a mountain athlete. Like this is the thing that I feel like I'm the best at on the world stage. And also that is the most exciting and compelling to me as an athlete, which is, that's why we do it, right?
Yeah. So your realization that going longer is better for you, that you stand out more, you thrive more. Like, we talk a lot about suffering on this podcast and kind of like the place of suffering. Like, is it your willingness to suffer that you've identified that allows you to go longer or excel more? Or what are the things that make you better as it goes longer?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think part of it is mental and part of it is physiological, and like mind is body, right? So it's kind of all the same thing at the end of the day. But I think that for me, part of the reason I've had success in the mountains is because I've taken the same approach that I had to training for running, whether it was, 5K, 10K in college up to, 100 miles. But taking that mentality about training and then transferred that more into the mountain world. And so I think that, even looking at Carl Egloff or even a guy like Kilian Jornet, who are both guys that I really admire and who I feel like kind of set the bar for me, in the 5 or 10 years before I came into the sport, I think they have a very, very different approach to training. And so one of the things that I've seen with myself is taking these ideas about how I structure training, what kind of training I do, how much training I do, and applying that into this really big mountain stuff. I think, to go back to your question, Adrian, I think there's two things about my physiology. One is that for whatever reason, I have a very, very high VO2 max. I've had that measured. And I think that's why I do well at altitude. And I have a really good ability to tolerate a tremendous amount of training volume. And that, you could say, is partly mental and the ability to deal with suffering. And especially once we start talking about 8,000 meters, there's a lot of that on the mental side. But I also think there's a physiological component of just, I feel like a lot of runners, especially, they hit a certain point of training volume and they just start to break down. And for whatever reason, whether like literally all the way back to college, I was always the guy that wanted to run more and train more and do more mileage. And I feel the same way now where, I can go and do, 15,000 meters of vert, 100 miles of running in a week, and it's fine. And my body can handle that, knock on wood, like at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that applying those methodologies and then going into the really big mountains, I don't think there's that many people that have done that before, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah. I mean, this is something we talked about and is very much one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on the podcast, and Sam as well, is like, we do see this like potential exactly how you described. Like, so many amazing things have been done in the big mountains, so many first ascents, so many new routes. And then, in the 2000s, we've watched people start to really think about like, oh, can I go base camp to summit in a single push? What does that look like? Can I carry less stuff? Can I, use less of that siege style mentality and do pretty unique things? And that ties right back to in the US. So much of what's happening here is, can people go faster in rock climbing on El Cap? Can people go faster in chaining multiple peaks in the Sierra? Things like that. But the majority of people doing that came not from, I'd say, professional or elite running backgrounds or athletic backgrounds. They came from mountaineering and climbing backgrounds and did amazing things. But the question is, like, when someone comes in with like a different perspective to coaching, to training, to nutrition, can cutting edge athletes just do transformative things? And then how is that going to change our sport as a whole?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that, I guess the first thing, because I'm sure you have a lot of like actual alpinist and mountaineer fans and listeners, I never claim to be an elite alpinist. Like, that is not my thing. It's not what I'm here for, and it's not what I'm claiming. Like, I know there's plenty of like hate on the internet for like, oh, like, people who whatever. We don't even need to go down.
We love the hate. Let's
bring it on. Bring it on. No, but the point being, like, it does feel like it's a different branch of the sport, in that, I'm not claiming to be going to do like Piolet d'Or kind of stuff. Like, I totally recognize that. And I'm not a world-class alpinist by any means. I think what I bring to the table is a really big engine that I've built up over many years, and just enough skills that I can move quickly on relatively straightforward mountain terrain, you would find on kind of the normal routes in the Himalaya. And so to me, that's the thing that's really exciting to me, is I can go to Manaslu or Ama Dablam or one of these really iconic mountains and say, okay, can I run up and down Ama Dablam in 6 hours? Which is kind of nuts. But now, with the skill set that I've built and the engine that I've built, seems feasible. And it does feel like it is a different branch of the sport. And I know some people probably don't like that. That's their thing. If they want to follow like technical alpinism, they can. I do. I think it's really cool what people are doing, but I get really excited about that stuff. I think it's really cool to combine, like you said, moving quickly, moving lightly, and really pushing the limit of what's possible in these mountains in a way that hasn't really been done before. Because I do feel like a lot of this stuff, there is a lot of meat on the bone. And there are a lot of mountains out there where, we can do base camp to summit in a single push, and we can do it super light and in a way that is exciting and compelling and can create new kind of storylines and bring in different athletes that might not necessarily have been there, 20 years ago.
So real quick, because we kind of have dabbled on it, I want to talk about style, because I think, we've talked a lot about style and different forms, and whether that's guided clients or cutting edge alpinists. And I think your style is unique in that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're climbing, especially in the 8,000 meter world, you're climbing with no oxygen. You are climbing on the fixed lines, following the pre-established track. And you're going as light and fast as you can without any support with you while you're climbing. But the support of pre-establishing the routes has already been done. Is that an accurate description of your style?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the way that I think about it is, maybe it's more akin to like sport climbing, like bolted climbing or something, where, okay, here's a route, someone said it, you still have to go do it. And for me, it's, okay, what's the way that I can get from the bottom to the top of the mountain the quickest in a way that feels like I'm on an even playing field with anyone else who would show up to the mountain. So yeah, I never use oxygen. I wouldn't, unless it were like a tremendous emergency or something. I do use the fixed lines because those are there, and because I think that that's part of what makes it interesting is in the Himalaya, especially, and that's the only place I've ever climbed on fixed ropes for what it's worth, it does allow you to go way faster. You know, like Ama Dablam for me is a mountain that if there were no lines on that mountain, like that would be a very, very slow day for me. You know, like I could do it, but it would be really slow. And I would be really scared. Yeah. It'd be really scary. But because it's fixed, suddenly you can go up and down quite quickly. So I think that's part of what makes it interesting to me. You know, again, I started in the mountain world on mountains like Cotopaxi and Aconcagua and Ojos, which are really straightforward, basically hike ups with, you know, some crevasse danger or whatever, but not a big deal. So to me, the part that's interesting is the part that feels like it's closest to where I come from, which is the trail running side. And it's okay, how fast can I move up the hill, basically? And, you know, I know lots of people are interested in the risk and the danger and, oh, this route is really, you know, you have to take a lot of risk, and that, you know, that is its own side. But to me, I would rather do something that's just really hard than something that's dangerous, if that makes sense. For the sake of being.
Yeah. And I think it's cool. You've pre-established your style and you're not adapting your style based on the mountain. You're just like, listen, here's my style. This is how I'm going to do it. And you've just set off with it like already established, and no one's going to agree with you, or not everyone's going to agree with you. And that's fine. That, you know, everyone has strong opinions, and you know what they say about opinions. But you're just like, this is my style for everything. And I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Speaking about risk, you know, I look at these speed records and I think like the biggest risk that I see is actually on the descent, because you guys are freaking hauling ass. Mm-hmm. Would you agree that that's where the biggest risks are taken for you?
Probably. I mean, objectively, most mountain accidents happen on descent, right? At least in really big mountains. I know it's like 80 or 90% of accidents happen on descent. So yeah, there's two things there. One is sometimes you're only going for an uphill record. So in that case, it's a little bit less pressure on the descent, but still, you still have the issue of being fatigued on the way down and dealing with momentum and things like that always cause problems on descent. But yeah, if I have to think about the routes I've done and the records I've done, for sure, like most of the risk that I'm taking, you're just going so much faster, right? It's just like a physics thing. Like you have a lot more momentum, you have a lot more speed. So it's easier for stuff to go wrong. It's something to think about. And it is one where, like on the 8,000ers, especially, I think most of the speed records are usually only one way. They're usually uphill. And I think that's part of the reason, because most people are just tremendously tired on the way down. And so they're leaving a lot on the ascent, and it's just too dangerous to like be rushing down an 8,000 meter mountain. But yeah, I think for me, even looking at like Aconcagua I just did last month, that descent was outrageous. And like, I mean, it's not a dangerous mountain, but it's basically a really steep scree trail run. And like, my goodness, yeah, I risked a lot of ankle breaks and stuff, but you know, you're probably not going to die. But if you put that at 8,000 or even 7,000 in the Himalaya on a glacier, like that could be a big problem.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many questions I have. I love it. Let's, you know, since we're still telling your story, like let's hit a few of those kind of like really notable FKTs, either that you set and have since been broken, or that you currently hold. And a lot of our listeners have climbed mountains like Cotopaxi, Aconcagua, Everest, things like that. So give us some times too.
Sure.
Don't be shy. Tell us how fast. Like because you know, me having been on all these mountains so many times, like when I read the times, some of the things you've done and some of your other people you admire, like Karl Egloff, Kilian, things like that, it is so hard to conceptualize. So I want to give the audience a chance to understand that.
Sure. Well, so, and an interesting part of the story, and we'll back up a little bit here. So if we go back to like 2020, I'd say there's a definitive line in my career between about 2020 and then just a little over a year ago, I actually got Achilles surgery. So about 13 months ago. And
full blown Achilles.
We'll get there. So,
okay.
So here's the kind of summary of those first like 2 or 3 years of doing mountain stuff. Is I had been dealing with an Achilles issue for like 3 or 4 years at that point already. I had a Haglund's deformity, which is a bone spur in your heel that grows into your Achilles tendon. And so it's one of these injuries that kind of just like gets a little bit worse every season. And so it had been going on for like 4 or 5 years at that point already. Another reason, coincidentally, that I found myself more drawn to the mountains was because doing stuff that was slower and less explosive on my Achilles it aggravated it less. So I remember even in 2023, is that right? Yeah. So 2023 was the first like really big season I had in the Himalaya. I went I climbed Manaslu, which is my first 8,000er. And then I set a whole bunch of FKTs in the Khumbu after that. And that went super great. And then I came back to the States afterwards and was trying to transition into training for a flat race. And like immediately it was really bad. It was like my Achilles was terrible. It was like I could barely run on it. I could barely walk on it. It was really bad. And so in December of 2023, I got laparoscopic surgery to remove this bone spur on my heel.
Okay.
And then I know this is a little bit of a tangent from your question, but I think it's important.
No, it's great.
Context.
We love tangents.
But yeah, so that was December 14th of 2023. So like 13 months ago. And originally I had not gotten this surgery. It's funny. I was like literally just doing a podcast talking about this afternoon. So it's super fresh, but I had read a lot about other runners who had this issue. And it was like 12 to 18 month recovery time to be back to 100%.
Wow.
I was like, I really don't want to have to do that. That sucks. But there's this brand new procedure called 10X, which is super minimally invasive. Only a handful of surgeons practice it in the States. I happen to know a woman who's also a pro runner who got this surgery. She recommended a surgeon. I literally called him, and like less than 2 weeks later, I was on his operating table in Arizona, and I was in Ecuador. So it happened super quickly. And then I was just totally blown away by how fast the recovery was. It was, December 14th, I got surgery. I was on the stationary bike the next day in a boot. And then I was able to train. Like I got super fit on the bike. And within 4 weeks, I think I was walking, and 8 weeks I was running again.
Wow.
And then 10 weeks after surgery, I broke my own record on Ojos. So it was
not 12 to 18 months.
No, it was unbelievable. And so it was this thing where not only was I back way faster than I thought to even something relatively competitive, but very quickly within a few months, I was doing stuff that I hadn't been able to do before the surgery, just because I was getting so much more power out of that leg than I had for like 5 years. And I was able to train better and more consistently. And so really like, I think that's 2024 was like my objectively the best year of my career last year so far, knock on wood. And like, I think a big part of that was literally just, I had 2 functioning lower legs all of a sudden.
Wow.
And I didn't even realize like how much that had been holding me back for so long. So all that is to say, like, to me, I very much see the last year as this kind of like Phoenix from the ashes thing of, I thought that I was okay at this stuff before. And now I'm like, wow, like I was actually really like, I'm blowing my own times out of the water, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah. You were being held back, maybe not even realizing.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't even realize it. Yeah. And so now, and even now it's like season, like in, last March, I thought, oh, I'm already back from surgery. But then it was like every month after that, I was just getting better and better and better. And like the summer went really well. And then my fall season, the Himalaya that just happened was super, super good. And now I'm just starting my spring build up, and it's even now, I've been training for 3 weeks, and it's already, my first 3 weeks of training are way better than the last build up. So it's just, I'm a very analytical person and look at data a lot, and being able to see, again, going all the way back to high school, it's like that same thing of, oh my gosh, like I can see exactly, I've run the same trails here in Quito for training now that I was doing in June, and oh my gosh, I can see how much faster I am now. And so it's super, super exciting to see that not only am I better, but it seems to be keeping on in that positive trajectory. So anyways,
enjoy being on that end of the curve. I'm on this podcast with 2 people in their early 30s, and it doesn't happen forever.
I know, but I've tried to take advantage of it while it does.
Hell yes. And I mean, I'm joking about that, but like, do you have any opinions, like in terms of mountain running, especially the FKT mountain stuff, which also entails experience and strategy and, there's risk management and mitigation, all these things. Like, do you have a sense? Where do you think a mountain runner peaks in terms of like, do you have a lot of years left? Yeah,
that's a great question. I think anyone who says an answer has no idea what they're talking about, because like no one knows, because it's such a new sport. I mean, like part of it depends on what you're talking about. Conrad Anker is doing amazing stuff still, and he's certainly in his 50s if he's not over 60 at this point.
Yeah. I should be careful saying that. Pretty sure. Yeah. No, he's in his
pretty sure too.
We love you, Conrad.
Yeah, we love you, Conrad. I mean, I think that the general wisdom, right, is that as events get longer, you can be competitive in them older, right? So the 100-meter dash you have till you're about 24, and the ultra marathons, you see people in their 40s that are still quite competitive. So I think it depends a lot. If you're talking about something that's really short and punchy, like a VK race or even something like Cotopaxi, that's an hour long record, like maybe that's, you got to be a little bit younger. But I think that if you're talking about, speed records on 8,000ers that are many hours, you're moving really slowly, you could probably get away with that quite a bit longer. I would hope that I certainly still have, 5 or 10 years at least left of being competitive at this level. But I think it goes back to what I was saying before about just kind of continuing to find your place, right, in sport, whether that's, just moving between different kinds of competition or, finding stuff that more suits your skill set. Like you said, as you kind of develop more skills, maybe you look for more skill-based challenges, things like that. So yeah, I think it really just depends. But I think people have shown in the mountaineering world, especially, and even in the speed side, Uli Steck is a good example too of someone who is, still doing world-class stuff into his 40s. So I think you could certainly keep doing that.
So what are those top times?
Okay, go back to that. Sure. Gosh, like
what are the ones you're most proud of? I would say.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Manaslu is probably one of the better, but the ones I'm most proud of. That was 9:52, 9 hours and 52 minutes from base camp to summit.
And Adrian, what's your
altitudes? Time? What are the altitudes in feet? Then we'll get to my time. Altitude from base camp to summit, just for people who are on. It's the 8th tallest mountain in the world.
Yeah, base camp is 4,700 meters. Sorry, I'm metric. And the summit is 8,163. So it's what is that, 3,500 meters. So it's probably 11,000 feet.
A bit more, 12,000,
something like that. And that one, I had actually tried the year before and failed and learned a lot. And then came back in 2024 healthier and with more experience. And this young guy, Pemba Gelje, thank you. He had broken the record last year by like an hour, the same year I was trying to do it. So it was 12 hours. And I went into that being like, okay, I think you can do 10 hours on this route. I knew I was really fit. And then, to be just a little bit under that was super exciting. So that was
so rad. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Amazing. I mean, I followed along quite closely because Pemba Gelje is a good friend. We climbed K2 together in 2019. And then obviously you and I had talked a lot before you ended up on Manaslu. And so I was so excited when you were both there, and it seemed like a pretty amazing year. And then for you to return the next year and break the record by so much, first of all, phenomenal and hard to imagine. I mean, Sam joked like what my time was. Of course, I've only ever guided Manaslu, but I think my fastest is 3 days, right? So 72 hours, maybe 60. So it's really, really impressive to be covering that much terrain up high without oxygen. Do you still see a lot of room? Like, could you go faster with what you've learned?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think like this is me coming from a running background. I think part of it is you're never quite satisfied, right? Like there's always something where like, I could definitely get 10 minutes off with that. So like, I don't know. I think that one is pretty stout, honestly, at this point for me. I'm sure there's someone, could come along who's a better athlete than me and smash it. But I think for me, that one's pretty close to my ability. And it's also, there's so much work that goes into an 8,000 meter speed record that, like, I don't know if I'd want to give it another go. There's just so many mountains out there that like, do I really want to spend a whole fall season on an 8,000er just to
beating it down by
30 minutes? Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, like I could maybe do that, but there's a lot of 8,000ers still like I would rather go climb. So I think there's the like, could it be done? And then like, will it be done question? And those are probably different questions.
But that said, you talked about beating your own record on Ojos. I believe you were on Aconcagua just recently and beat your own record on Aconcagua. So there are certain times where you're like, I do want to go back and be faster and faster. Are those equally as proud moments, or is that just part of your training and you end up being faster and that's a benchmark for you?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, so the Ojos one is a really good example because that, like I said before, was right after I got surgery. It was like the first really big thing I did after surgery. And so to me, that was a very important personal challenge because it showed to me, okay, I can still do this, because I knew that the mark I had set, I felt pretty good about. So to be able to go and do that so quickly after surgery was really important to me. I wasn't assuming that anyone else was really going to care about it because Ojos is not that popular of a mountain. I knew that it would, like, okay, I tried really hard on that. It was really challenging and I still got it, and that's great. So I was really proud of it. I didn't expect, outside magazine or anything to come knocking. But for me, that was a really important milestone. And then Aconcagua is another one where, some of these are just almost coincidental, where the Aconcagua record, I was there with some friends who had never climbed it before. And I just had a free day, and it was a good weather day. And so I just sent it really quick from base camp. That was also, so the Aconcagua one that I just broke, there's two records on Aconcagua. One is the long route, which goes all the way from Orcones, like at the park entrance, up and down, which is like 80K or something. And that was kind of like the premier route, I think, because Killian had it, and then Carl had it, and then I broke it. And yeah, if you want a time, I think it's 11:24 was the round trip from Orcones to the summit and back.
Amazing. And then that's a round trip.
Yeah, that's a round trip. And then the base camp record I had set as like a training day a few years, like on that same expedition when I did the long record. And then some guy broke it like a year or two ago. And I do have a little bit of, come on, like, what are you doing, buddy? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get that at some point. And then it just happened to work out this year that I was there with some friends. They hadn't climbed it. I was just going to go up with them in a couple of days. And there was one good weather day. The conditions in the mountain seemed good. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go for it. And so I went and did so that was base camp, summit base camp in 4 hours, 35. And that was really, really hard. I was like,
that sounds painful.
That was
so
really hard.
Up and down. That's tree slope.
That was like one of the most painful descents of my entire life. That route is so steep on the way down, because you can kind of cut the whole traverse off and just come straight down that diagonal. Which I'd never done before because it had always been iced over, but it was completely dry. We didn't even bring crampons to that whole trip.
Oh, amazing.
It was totally dry. I literally went up in running shoes. But yeah, like bombing down that, I think I got from the summit to base camp in like a little over an hour. That was really hard, and I was totally destroyed. But it was, so that was one. Some of these are like long projects where I'm training very specifically for this one thing, like Manaslu, for example. And then some of them are kind of last minute, where maybe I have a chip on my shoulder or like I just happen to be somewhere, or it's more of a personal project. Here in Quito, for example, is another good example of a place where there are a lot of even just like Strava segments and stuff that I care about, because it's a good benchmark for me against myself, or there's a handful of other guys in the city who are quite strong that I can kind of compare myself against, including Carl. And so like sometimes I'll just go for those and give it a really hard push, and I know exactly what it means, and it means a lot to me, but like literally like 5 other people on earth care about it.
Right. So how important is like Strava in this world, or like how are FKTs being tracked? How do you prove your record? Who's like the database of these? Give us a little background to all of that.
So fastestknowntime.org was founded by these guys, Buzz and Peter, way back in the day. And I think they allegedly coined the term FKT, and they're like old timers. They're definitely in their 60s. And so it's a whole like FKT used to be kind of just literally like the fastest known time. Like you ask your friends, hey, who's run that trail the fastest? And it's like, well, this is the fastest time that I know of, and now it is like a whole database where there is a whole system of, you have to submit a route, or the routes are usually already there, but you have to submit your time. You have to provide some kind of proof, which is usually through Strava or Garmin Connect or something like that. And then, there are people that review that, and, then it's an actual thing. And in like, there's a whole thing. They have different categories. You can have supported and unsupported and stuff like that. So yeah, it is, I would say it's pretty well kind of kept track of at this point. And I think especially since 2020, because it was the same thing for everybody. It wasn't just for us as professionals. Like everyone didn't have races to do for that year. Right. So this whole idea of FKTs and even just Strava segments kind of blew up. I think in the general population, you saw a lot more people on the site submitting routes, going for FKTs and stuff like that. So I think the big difference with Strava and like just Strava segments versus FKTs, I think the FKTs are a little bit more curated. Like you could literally submit a Strava segment for your driveway, but you couldn't submit cool. But you can't do that. Like the FKT people won't approve that because they're like, this is silly. We're not going to approve your driveway, Adrian. Sorry.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so who does decide? Like if I think of as an uneducated user, if I think about some of the most famous FKTs, maybe it's like Mont Blanc, Church to Church in Chamonix, or obviously the Grand Teton. Maybe we'll touch on that quickly, but obviously it's been like heavily fought about and now there's controversy around it and things like that. How is it sort of decided? Is it just the community that sort of decides like, okay, this one's going to be on this trail versus this trail, or this one's going to be up only versus up or down? Or do they all have, does every mountain have a load of FKTs and then people sort through what they care about?
It depends a lot on the route in the mountain. So yeah, the short answer is it depends. The long answer is I would say historical context is really important. So if it's a mountain like Mont Blanc, I don't even know if that's a great example. I don't know that much about Mont Blanc, but if it's a mountain that has like a whole bunch of different routes and they're all super competitive, then yeah, you might have 5 different FKTs listed on the website, something like that. Whereas, if it's a mountain like, say in Aconcagua, where there is a normal route and there's a very strong historical precedent of people doing really competitive stuff on this one route, okay, that's the one route. And you would have to have a really good reason to submit something else other than that.
Yeah.
If you're like, hey, we're going to go do the South Face in a day, that would be pretty badass. And you could totally submit that and it would probably get approved and it would establish a new historical precedent. Yeah, I know, right, man? It's pretty gnarly.
Especially today's day and age.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's basically just, a combination of what are the aesthetic lines and then what is the historical context of competition. I think those are the 2 really big things that I think about when I look at like what FKTs I want to do. Like I'm a sucker for aesthetics. So like I did Mount Fuji Sea to Summit and I don't think anyone had really done that before. There was like one time, but it was just like a guy who had hiked it or something. But I was like, okay, this is just a really cool aesthetic route. I just want to go do it and like set a bar that's like, I feel like appropriate for how cool this route is,
Yeah, absolutely. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference. And, we talk sometimes about the business of being an athlete or in the outdoor industry. Is the FKT world, has it reached a point where can you make a living as a mountain athlete setting FKTs?
Yeah, I mean, apparently, because here I am. Like, no, I mean, honestly, that was, so I switched sponsors. I'm with La Sportiva now. They're my primary sponsor. And this was,
congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, they're awesome. And like, I've been with them for a little over a year now. And a big part of that was exactly what you're talking about, which was, I was with another brand, a more traditional shoe brand for a long time, one brand for like 10 years as a runner. And they were very established in the trail running world and the road running world, but they did not really get the whole FKT thing. Again, they did the kind of bonuses during COVID, but once races came back, it was just like, hey, when are you going to run Western States? When are you going to run UTMB? I was going, like, I set the Aconcagua record. I set the Kilimanjaro record. Like, I set the Everest Base Camp Trail record. I did these things that got me a lot of visibility as an athlete. And I literally just paid for them out of pocket and got nothing from that brand. So I was like, this doesn't seem like that great a fit. And then especially as I got more into bigger mountains and needed more gear, suddenly it wasn't just that this isn't a good fit in terms of our goals, but it was also that you guys just don't even make the gear I need. So it was, it was kind of a no-brainer to eventually switch over. And now I don't know what y'all's experience is, but in terms of, contracts and support, I think now we're a lot more aligned in terms of what my goals are, what Sportiva's goals are for me and for them as a brand. And, they just want me to like, hey, go out and do awesome stuff. And if that's, winning UTMB, that's awesome. And if it's setting a record on an 8,000er, that's also awesome. Or if it's going to an 8,000er and trying to set a record and you don't, and you share a really awesome story about it, like that's still great. We still love that. So it's a much better setup for me as an athlete because my goals are more aligned with theirs. And there's also just way less pressure on that idea of, oh my gosh, I have to go out and earn my paycheck to pay rent, literally, so it's a much better setup.
And suddenly they have a much greater understanding of like what it takes to be successful in the big mountains and like how many factors there are outside. And I think to a brand, like how valuable a story can be, even if it doesn't, maybe like your first year on Manaslu, where it didn't work out to set a record. And yet you're like, learning was massive. Your experience was massive.
Exactly.
And like, it's so powerful. And well, I got to shout out Sportiva. I mean, I've been with Sportiva since I was 17 years old. I got my first pair of shoes. So I'm over 3 decades with the brand, and
that's
just
awesome.
like love them, love what they make. I love that you've joined the team. And like you say, you know, it's a much better fit, obviously, because they do make this like broad range of things from trail running all the way to 8,000 meter boots. But I think one of the most fun things for people who maybe don't know too much about how you've done these things is you actually don't need those 8,000 meter boots, because if
I've literally never worn them on a mountain.
You climbed Manaslu, 27,000 feet tall, 8th tallest mountain in the world, and if I'm right, you wore running shoes with spikes.
I wore the Cyclone GTX, if you know that shoe.
I love the Cyclone.
It's an amazing shoe. It's like my mountain shoe. Like I cannot. I mean, honestly, so I wore that literally the same pair of that on Manaslu, and then on Ama Dablam, on Lobuche, on Island Peak, on a couple others, and I cannot believe I got away with that on Manaslu, honestly. Like, so for what it's worth, I did have the Equilibrium Speed, which is kind of one step up from that shoe. So I had those stashed at Camp 3 on Manaslu. And we could talk about the Manaslu, because the Manaslu was crazy because I wasn't even planning to go to the summit that day. I don't know if you've heard me talk about this, but we'll do a tangent here again. So Manaslu, I've been there for, 3 weeks at base camp, and with my climbing partner, Chris Fisher, who, shout out to him. He's an amazing athlete. He was there to ski the mountain, and he's also an amazing photographer, mountain athlete, just general badass guy. And he and I had done exactly one load carry from base camp to Camp 3, which is 6,600 meters. That was the highest we'd been on the mountain. We carried a whole bunch of stuff up there, set up a tent, and then come down. Basically, every other day, I was just kind of running to Camp 1 and back, which is like 5.8 or something, if I remember correctly. But I'd only been to 5.8, and then I'd been to one trip to 6.6, and that was it. And the plan was Chris and I were going to go together from base camp to like Camp 4, and then come down and rest a few days. And then I was going to try and do the FKT. And that morning, Chris was sick. He had like food poisoning or something. I was like, okay, whatever. I guess I'll just go by myself and do my acclimatization day. And so I go up, and I'm like kind of looking at my watch, and I'm like, I'm making pretty good time. And I get to Camp 3, and I'm like, wow, I'm making really good time. And I call Dawa Steven, who's on the radio with me at base camp, who's our logistics guy and good friend now in Nepal. And I'm like, hey, Dawa, like, I'm going to keep going up to Camp 4. Okay, whatever. And then like halfway up to Camp 4, I'm like, man, I'm making really good time to Camp 4. And I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, hey, Dawa, don't tell anybody, but like, how's the weather up there right now? Because like, I'm feeling really good, and I'm on like making really good time. Like, should I just go for it? And he's like, hey, there's no wind, because you can see, the big summit ramp on Manaslu from base camp. And he's like, there's no wind. The ropes were just fixed to the summit yesterday. So there's like one party on the route. So like, if you feel great, just go for it. And so I got to Camp 4, looked at my watch again. I'm like, man, Camp 4 is like 7,500 meters or something. And I'm like, I don't remember exactly what my splits were, but I was like, man, I've got a lot of time. I might as well just go for this. Like, you don't, strike while the iron's hot kind of. And so I kept in touch with Dawa and just kept checking in. And so, I wasn't even planning to go to the summit. I literally only had 1 liter of water that I brought from base camp that day. Because when I left Camp 3, I was like, well, I'm just going to go up like an hour and then come back, and then I'll boil some water and get some food and whatever. Sure. So I left Camp 3 at 66 with like, I don't know, a half liter of water to go all the way to the summit and back down.
Sam's
like,
mountain guide brain is exploding right now.
I know, really, like, please don't, like, this
red
is my
flag,
like,
red flag.
No one, like, if you're listening to this, never do anything that I do, please. And yeah, so, and that was why I was in the Cyclones too. Like, I didn't change shoes because I was like, well, it's pretty warm, it's fine. It was during the day. I'm not going to go that much higher. So I was in my Cyclones, which again is basically a running shoe with a rubber gaiter on it. That's literally what it is. It's not even a boot. It doesn't even go above your ankle. I had that and a pair of like semi-technical crampons, like 1 centimeter crampons. But sometimes everything just like, it was just like a perfect day. Everything aligned. Like the sun was out all day. There was no wind. I felt amazing. For some reason, like being able to go from 6.6 to 8.2 in a day just like made absolutely no sense, but whatever. Like, I'm not arguing, and it worked, and I got down quickly and safely, and it was fine. It was like, okay, thank you. Thank you. We're done now.
Such a great day. I mean, I think there's so much power in, of course, planning and training and having all these things worked out, and then like recognizing your moment in time, right?
Exactly.
When things align, maybe in a way you didn't expect, but being willing to like grab it, I think is really powerful and very useful in the big mountains.
Yeah. For sure.
So on the gear front, you're in running shoes. Do you have heated socks on?
That day I didn't. It wasn't that cold, man. Honestly, like it was just not that cold. Like it, and here's the thing: I'm moving pretty quickly, so you're generating a lot of heat, especially going uphill. And you've been on these glaciers when it's high when it's sunny and you're that high up. I had a light puffy jacket, a long sleeve shirt, and a windbreaker. That was it. And like one layer of light snow pant. It wasn't even insulated. That was it. And I was fine.
Incredible.
I was never cold. I was never cold that day.
And then a liter of water.
1 liter of water.
What's your fuel? Are you on like goos and gels? Or are you on real food or no food at all?
Yeah, no. So this is another thing where I think there's a lot of meat on the bone on some of these mountaineering things is I approach the fueling thing very much from an ultra running perspective. And even as an ultra runner, I look a lot at like what the Tour de France guys are doing. And they're pushing 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour nowadays, which is incredible with some of these new products. Like that's, what is that, like 350 or 450 calories an hour? It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. But because some of these high-tech products, like the way that they're digested and stuff, like especially if you train with it, your body can adapt and can do that. And so you're able to go at a much higher intensity for a much longer time if you can keep your GI system functioning. So yeah, I'm always amazed when I go with people who are much more experienced mountaineers and alpinists than me. And they're like, yeah, I got like a granola bar and a ham sandwich. And I'm like, what? I'm taking like 3 gels an hour, man. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so yeah, like that is the one thing on Manaslu I know that I fueled very well. I did not fuel with water, or I didn't hydrate well, but for sure I was doing, 300 to 400 calories an hour. And I think that's part of why I've been successful is because if you're looking at a 10 to 15 hour day, that's an ultra marathon. That's like a 100-mile race. You can't do that on a ham sandwich and a granola bar. Like you'd be crazy, right? Like no runner would ever consider that. But so what you're able to do is like, I look at my heart rate data and stuff, and it's like, I'm in like zone 2, zone 3 for 10 or 15 hours, but I can sustain that because I'm feeling really well during that time. And my body's used to that. So I think that's part of what is allowing me to maybe move a little bit quicker, especially like in the later stages of a big ascent where I'm fueling really well for the first 6 hours. So those last 3 hours or whatever on Manaslu, I'm moving really slow because I'm at 8,000 meters or whatever, but it's faster than I would be if I were also bonking out of my skull because I didn't eat enough,
That's really interesting because one of my great challenges without oxygen is fueling once I'm above probably 26,000 feet. I found it really difficult. So like on Everest, for instance, since I didn't go base camp to summit, I used the camps. I slept a night at 8,300 meters and 27,000 feet. And fueling, my GI system was basically shut down. So then you're kind of forced to fall back onto like your fat adaptation because you can't put calories in. Have you found like even on Manaslu, like you just mentioned, were you able to continue that fueling all the way to the summit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do a lot of fasted training as well so that I have a really strong fat metabolism and I can go for a long time, especially at low intensity on that. But I think, maybe that's one of the like weird freakish things about me is I do have a pretty good stomach and a pretty good GI system. So yeah, I mean, and to go back, Sam, to your question before, I would say, especially in big mountains and in Nepal, it's a combination of foods. So I'll do gels. I'll also do just like Mars bars and, chapati and egg and, things like that. And I think for me, mixing it up like that is really important. If it's something super long, if it's something really short and punchy, like I'm going with high-tech sports products 100% of the time. And full disclosure, I'm sponsored by Morton and I love their products and I will use them for really.
I used them for the first time this past spring due to my client and
it's incredible.
They are fantastic.
I mean, there's a reason like all of the high-level cyclists and runners are using them. And I think those guys are a lot of the time kind of tip of the spear in terms of the nutrition side. So I look very much to what they're doing. And so, if I'm doing a record here in Ecuador, that's, an hour or two, I will absolutely use that stuff and I'll treat it like it's a half marathon or a marathon and, just absolutely crank the carbohydrates in. But if it's something super long, like I'll still be often sipping Morton out of my bottles. But again, if I only have 1 liter in 10 hours, it doesn't really matter that much. but also in 10 hours, I think you get some just like mouth fatigue of having the same thing, the same flavor, the same consistency. So I love chapati egg or like aloo paratha with egg or like something that's like greasy and salty after having a lot of sweet stuff. That's really nice to break things up. So I'll mix in super high-tech sports stuff with like literally like gas station junk food and like, whatever the chef at base camp is making.
Yeah, I think that nutrition side is really interesting, and there's probably a lot of like learning and progress that can happen there.
Yeah.
But That makes a lot of sense, what you're doing. These are like some of the things I just love seeing that you're bringing to the sport and looking with fresh eyes and things like that. Like, back in the 2010s, I was working on the south side of Everest a lot, and I liked going fast, or at least what I thought was fast. And so I would do a lot of Sherpa carries, base camp to camp 2. And I would carry a smaller pack, but I would be trying to see how fast I could go. And I'm sure I wasn't the first person, but I decided to start wearing sneakers and micro spikes, just Sportiva sneakers and micro spikes to camp 2. And camp 2 is at like 21,500 feet, maybe. Yeah, 21, 22. And one of my Sherpa partners, Dorje Sonam, who's my Sirdar and Alpenglow Sirdar to this day, just one of my best friends in the world, he started doing it too. And I remember in 2011 when the people who run the mountain decided to have an intervention and called a meeting with all expedition leaders to ban not wearing mountain boots through the ice fall. And like, that was still a thing at that point, that it was like, it was considered so out there and so dangerous. And the theory was, how can you help someone else if you're worried about your toes getting cold, basically? So
but the ice fall is not even that cold, is the thing. Like, I get it at 8,000, but like, come on, ice fall is like 5,000 meters. It's not that cold.
Totally. But so we actually got banned, and a rule was made and transmitted to all the teams that you were no longer allowed to wear sneakers through the ice fall. And obviously today that would be considered crazy. But it's because of the progression of the sport that's happening, both on the Sherpa side and as foreign climbers come and bring different skill sets and show what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's fairness in that. Like, if I'm wearing super light gear and I'm doing a speed record attempt, like, I actually have had to help other people on the mountain during speed records. I remember the first time I did Ama Dablam 2 years ago from Pangboche to the summit and back, I had to help a guy down, and it is what it is. Like, that to me, that's mountain ethics, is you help people.
Absolutely.
But that said, if I'm taking my friends who are not that experienced in the mountains and we're going together and I'm kind of the one in charge, my kit is going to look very, very different than if I am going by myself for a speed record. And I will still stop and I will still help people. But I also recognize that, yes, I'm not going to be as helpful if I'm in the gear that I'm going for a speed record in, where, every single gram counts and I'm like, cutting off straps in my backpack to save weight. I don't have extra stuff. And I don't have enough warm gear that like you said, I could sit around and help get someone out of a crevasse or something. So it's a fair criticism, especially if you're working on the mountain. I totally get that.
Totally different.
But at the same time, I also think, and I've heard you say this on the podcast before, Adrian, I listened to some of your episodes, that, for me, I think speed can be safety a lot of the times. And I think that the ice fall is a really good example of that, where, Chris Fisher and I went through the ice fall like 6 or 7 times in the spring, which is very scary. But also, when you look at it numerically, we're going through the ice fall in, I don't know, an hour and a half or something.
Right.
Whereas for most people, like, maybe not most people, but like some people on our expedition were taking like 8 to 10 hours to get through the ice fall. So all of our ice fall time combined is still less than that.
It's still less.
So
you're absolutely right.
So to me, like, when I'm in the mountains, like, the scariest thing is being in, below places that are really avalanche prone or Serac collapse prone or something, or rockfall, where it's something that's super out of your control. And the best thing you can do is move through those places as quickly as possible. And so I look at that as, okay, yes, I am sacrificing something in terms of having more warm gear or more food or more water or a stove, but I'm spending 1/10 less time in this really exposed, objectively hazardous place,
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, of course, there's a line where it can go, quote unquote, too far, or it can not work out, right? But a lot of times, speed in, especially those areas with random risk, I think it is such a powerful, tool to use. And we always used to look at that as expedition leaders, in terms of like, if Sherpa go through the ice fall on average in 2 hours and our clients on average go in 5 to 6 hours, like, we don't want anyone to be taking outsized risk on our teams. Clients should take risk. Sherpa should take risk. Mountain guides should take risk. And that is one of the ways we kind of factored how many trips is reasonable. If any are reasonable, how many are reasonable, kind of thing. I do think, and you sort of mentioned this as you were talking about this, I do think, you said earlier, like, maybe you don't like, risk is not such a big part of what you find fascinating in what you're doing. I do think moving very fast in the mountains with the limited kind of backup you are able to carry while moving fast, I think there is a real risk to that.
Oh, totally.
I'm sure you do as well. What would it look like, twisted ankle, broken leg, 8,000 meters on a speed ascent, like, do you just accept that risk, or have you thought it through? Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, so going back to the Manaslu example, part of the reason that Chris and I carried that big load up to Camp 3 is so that we have a tent and we have stuff stashed there that we probably won't need, but most of that stuff is backup stuff. It's bigger jackets, it's a sleeping bag, it's a stove, it's gas, it's extra food, So we do have that kind of, I think about those kind of things quite a bit as, okay, I want to go as light as possible. And I also don't want to get killed. And I want to set up as much kind of a safety net as I can for myself, right? So I'm not assuming that things are going to go wrong, but if something goes wrong, how can I build some kind of infrastructure or safety net that will protect me in that case? And yeah, I've had issues that I've had to deal with myself, and luckily nothing catastrophic. Part of that is like you make your own luck, I like to think. And I think a lot of that is preparation. But like you said, there's a lot of random risk and things that you can't control when you go into these, especially really high alpine mountain environments. And there's just, anything like, you said you could break your ankle at 8,000 meters. That'd be a pretty big problem for anybody. And especially if you're up there solo. And at that point, honestly, I don't really think it matters if you're there doing an FKT or if you're just soloing on the mountain, or, obviously if you're a client with a mountain guide, like Sam here, then you have a person who can really help you. And that's why I do these expeditions with a partner, whether they're on the mountain with me literally during my FKT or not, but always having someone who's at least aware of where I am. And I know that if something really serious happens and I'm stuck somewhere in a situation, that I could call them and at least have someone that I know and trust that's there on the mountain that could come help me out of a really serious situation. So it's one of these things where we do as much as we can ahead of time. And I think for me, the most important part of that is just being as prepared as I can, like being really, really fit, knowing the route, knowing the weather, knowing myself, having really clear turnaround times, things that, don't sound like rocket science, but are, to me, those are the things that make me feel the most prepared. And then having people that I trust there on the mountain in case something goes wrong,
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that answer. Like, I'm just a huge believer in, like, people should be allowed to take massively outsized risk in the mountains. Like, that's how cutting edge things happen, whether it's pure door style new routes or ski descents or incredibly fast climbs. I just think it's super important to kind of like acknowledge what those risks might be or might not be, and then think them through, discuss them, like you said, with a partner, and then mitigate what you can and accept what you can. And it sounds like, you're quite young to the 8,000 meter world. You're still beginning your career in those things. And yet it sounds like that's exactly the process you're going through as you attempt these things. So
yeah,
well
absolutely.
done.
Thank you.
So Tyler, what's next? Where, obviously you have some quite impressive accomplishments in the big mountain world. You've done the Aconcagüas, the Ojos, the Cotopaxis, and you've started to dabble in the Himalaya more and more. Is the 8,000 meter world like your target, or do you find you're just interested in different speed records around the world?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the 8,000 meter world. Right now I do have a really big project that I am prepping for in May. I can't go into the exact specifics. I can tell you that it will be a big mountain in Nepal, and that it is a lot of what I've been doing in the last couple of years has been building towards this. So that's about as much as I can say about it. But yeah, I think for sure the 8,000 meter world is one where I see, like I said, I think there's a lot of meat on the bone on some of those marks. And personally, I think kind of like as stuff got longer, I got better. I think also as stuff gets higher, I get better. For whatever reason. So that's something that I find not only do I do well, but I find it a really interesting challenge in terms of preparation and training and the kind of mental side that Adrian, you were asking about a while ago, the suffering, all that stuff. 8,000 meter climbing is such an interesting puzzle when you do it in a speed ascent way, where, you have to have the skills, you have to have the mental side dialed, you have to have the nutrition, you have to have some logistics, you have to have a little bit of luck, you have to have a lot of fitness, you have to all these different things. And I think my kind of engineer brain is very intrigued by puzzles like that. So yeah, I think I'll definitely be in the 8,000ers for sure this year, and hopefully for a while to come.
Awesome.
Amazing. Well, before I could tell Sam's going to cut us off, but I did want to ask then. So, you have some sort of project this spring in the big mountains. What does the next, let's say, I think I leave in 90 days for Everest to guide the north side. What does the next 3 months look like for you? You mentioned training load. What does that training load look like? Any special things? Are you going to big mountains or staying in Quito? And maybe you could tie in as well, if I understand correctly, Chasky is you're wearing the hat, a coaching company that you either founded or coach with. Maybe you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, those are kind of separate questions. I'll speak to Chasky briefly. I don't want to plug too hard. Yeah, it's a company that I founded with a bunch of runner friends back during the pandemic, where we kind of all realized that we were all doing online coaching like in tandem, and we're like, why don't we do this together? That'll be a lot more fun. So yeah, we're a bunch of pro athletes that coach mostly runners and trail runners. We've kind of started getting more into the mountaineering world, mostly just because of me and what I've been doing in the last handful of years. And like Chris Fisher, my climbing partner, is also coaching with us now. So we do some climbing and skiing as well. But yeah, it's all online coaching. And then we also we've started doing some travel trips, camps, retreats, stuff like that, like grown-up running camp. It's really fun.
Really?
So that was where I was on Aconcagua. Actually, we did a trip to Chile on the Chilean side, like on Ojos and those 6,000ers around there, with a bunch of people. And then a handful of us went over to Aconcagua right after. So that was that. So yeah, Chasky, CHASKI.run. If you're interested, hit us up.
Fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah. And then to talk about the next 3 months, gosh, yeah, we could do a whole other podcast on training, but
maybe we will.
There will be a part 2, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, so this next 3 months, the really big thing, where's my notebook? I literally wrote down, like, I have to cover this up, but like I wrote down like a whole bunch of things on the plane on the way here. And the very first one is don't get greedy. And the reason for that was I felt like everything that I need for this May project I had in the fall. So if I can kind of just replicate what I did in the summer, then that's going to go. And I was training here in the summer too. So this is where I go back to like benchmarks and data. It's like, I know exactly where I was in the summer. I know exactly where I have to be. And I don't need to go crazy and get super greedy and take tremendous risk in training of injury or anything. It's like, if I don't get greedy and I get really fit and I don't get hurt, then like, that's my number one goal. But also like for me, that's still a lot. So I mean, right now I just literally started like 2-3 weeks ago, kind of serious training here. So I train every day. I train twice a day. In general, I'm doing a longer session in the morning. That's usually on our local mountain here, Ruku Pichincha. So I'm running up and down that almost every day. And that's about 2,000 meters.
Not using the gondola, I'm guessing.
No, from the city. So it's about 2,000 meters up from the city to the summit. And so that's kind of my bread and butter. And then in the afternoon, a lot of the time I'll do like a shorter session on the bike, just to get in some like low zone 1, zone 2. And then 2 to 3 times a week, I would say I'm doing something like quality. And so again, this is me coming from the running background and kind of using that vocabulary, but double threshold, I don't know if that's permeated into y'all's world, but that's like a very hip term in running nowadays, which has been popularized by some track and field and marathon guys. And I've found that is super helpful, or that my body responds very well to that kind of stimulus, which is essentially doing 2 sessions of threshold work in a single day with like a short recovery in between. So that might look something like in the morning, and I'll just use what I literally did this week. In the morning, I did like 4 minutes on, 1 minute off, with the 4 minutes at lactate threshold and 1 minute jogging recovery. And that's like up a steep climb. So I'm doing that all by effort and by heart rate. And that would be for about an hour. So you're doing maybe like 45 minutes of work and 15 minutes of rest. And then you rest a couple hours, have a protein shake. And then in the afternoon, doing something at a slightly higher intensity. So that would be, I think I did like 90 seconds on, 1 minute off, but quite a bit harder. So we call it critical velocity, like maybe 30-minute race pace. That one I did like uphill on a treadmill in a gym. And then I would do like a lifting session after that. So that's like my hard day. And I would do that 2 or 3 times a week.
That's a day.
That's a hard day. That's a long day. That's 2 to 3 days a week. And then the other days are like, sometimes very, very, very easy and slow. Like, zone 1, if my legs are really tired, do it, but still quite long, 3 or 4 hours up and down the mountain in the morning. And then, maybe another 45 minutes on the bike in the afternoon.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Can't wait to see what happens.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Well, Tyler, I hate to wrap it up, but we do want to keep it tight. We ask every guest for your best Duffel Shuffle story. It's an interesting one because you probably bring like a fifth as many duffel bags into the mountains.
Shorts and maybe flip-flops.
But think trains, planes, automobiles, and a total nightmare of a saga surrounding duffel bags.
Oh gosh, duffel bags. It's funny because like I actually don't really, well, actually until now, I've just moved into an apartment here that I think I'm going to keep all year. But for like the last 3 years, I haven't actually had like a place that is mine. I've just been going from point A to point B to point C. So I have way too much stuff all the time because I'm like constantly like everything I own. Yeah, it's my whole life. Like literally, I've been duffel shuffling for like the last 4 years. So, gosh, I mean, knock on wood, I feel like I haven't had like any like terrible like lost luggage story or anything like that. There was one, when was that? There was one where I think it was on the way to Nepal in August. I flew into Chamonix to go to UTMB just to be there for the week. And I was there with some friends and I had like, it was one of these things, tight connection, whatever, my bag didn't make the flight. And so I was with one of my best friends and his wife. And so like all I had was my like little carry-on backpack and my bag took like 3 days to get to Chamonix because I had to get from Geneva to Chamonix, whatever. And so I ended up wearing, my friend is like 6'5" and his wife is tiny. So I was like either wearing her clothes or his clothes for like 3 days. So that might be my funniest like kind of duffel bag losing story of shuffling around. But yeah, it's been a lot of hauling stuff just because you know how it is. Like sponsors are always sending you stuff and that's great. But then it's like, okay, I always leave stuff in Kathmandu with the hope of like, okay, next time I won't have to bring anything. Yeah. And then Sportiva is like, we want you to use this new product. And I'm like, okay, now I have to bring a whole suitcase full of new stuff, you know?
You have all new colors, new designs. They're a little lighter. Yeah. They want photos and suddenly you're bringing it all over again.
It's a very, very good problem to have. It's a very first world problem, but it's pretty funny.
All right. Now, second question, Tyler, that we ask everyone is, you're going on this next trip, whatever it might be. What is that very first thing that you're going to make sure you pack, that you bring on every trip, no matter where you go?
First thing I pack that I'm going to bring. That's a good question. Honestly, it might be my little like running vest. I've kind of like customized it at this point where it started out as like an actual brand's product that I bought off the shelf like many years ago. And since then it has like fallen apart and been put back together and I've customized it and added pockets. And it's that I keep in my carry-on because I will not lose that ever.
That is the thing.
That's the thing. Exactly. Yeah. So that's the answer. That's like my, sharpest samurai sword that I keep close at hand all the time.
Did you even use it up Manaslu?
I probably did. I honestly don't remember what bag I wore up there because I'm actually, well, this is going to be too long of a tangent, but we'll just say yes. Let's just say yes.
Awesome. I love it. Running vest.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Tyler, thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're in Quito and you're in a hard training block right now, getting ready for the spring. So we appreciate your time and look forward to chatting you again about training.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's been a blast.
Thanks so much for joining us. I hope I see you flying by me sometime in the mountains soon.
We'll see.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle Podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.